This video is sponsored by Microsoft.
Let's go ahead and go down the line here. Now, everyone may be seeing you slightly differently. Who I see first is Stephen Nielsen, appropriately. So, Stephen, could you jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself and your role on the Photoshop team?
Yeah, so I'm Stephen Nielsen. I'm the Director of Product Management. I'm based in Seattle, just at the foot of Mount Rainier, as you can see. Live casting straight from Mount Rainier National Forest. So I've been on the team for 9 years, which makes me relatively young on the team. But I've been using Photoshop for a long time. I think my first version was 5.5, which is just after, actually maybe it was 5. I can't remember, but that's what Russell's got as his background. And just I guess a quick explanation, product management, the product management team, we work a lot with customers, trying to figure out what are the things that we should build next. So we work really closely with the engineering team, with the designers, with the QE, and help organize and prioritize the things that we should build next. So it's a very collaborative effort. We work really closely as an overall team. And it's a fun product to work on. I think everybody really enjoys it, as evidenced by the fact that people stick around for a long time. 9 years being not very long on the Photoshop team. People love being on this team because it's a great product and a great group of people that build it.
Not following my own instructions. Unmute myself first. That's great. I want to ask you more about that, about the team and how it is to manage them in a little bit. But let's first get over to, I'm just going to jump over to the other side. Jesper. Jesper, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you've been with the team quite a bit longer.
Sure. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. Yeah, my name is Jesper, which is a Danish name. I've actually been on the Photoshop team slightly less time than Stephen Nielsen, because I think I joined the Photoshop team about 5 years ago, maybe. But before that, I was in a different team at Adobe that created technologies shared by many products. So for example, panels and document management, we have in Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign. That was one of the technologies I was working on before I joined the Photoshop team. I've spent a lot of time on actually making sure Photoshop works well. So I spent a lot of time with Apple and Microsoft on resolving weird little platform issues and making sure that with the latest OS, we still work correctly. Before I joined Adobe, I was in a company back in Denmark that did database publishing, and we did a lot of automated workflows where we would use, for example, Photoshop. I think 5.0 was one of my earlier versions too. And that sort of spilled into Adobe. In Photoshop 7, I spent a lot of time on exposing a scripting interface to Photoshop, Apple Script, Visual Basic, and ExtendScript. And now what I'm working on right now is actually replacing all of that with a modern automation and extensibility platform. I think we're talking about in other sessions on this conference as well. And so I spend a lot of time on these core workflows inside of Photoshop. So automation and user experience.
That's great. The other sessions that Jesper was talking about is one of the sort of the secret parts of Creative Pro Week is some sessions called the Creative Developers Summit, which is, it's not so secret, but it's basically for developers who support creatives. And so anyone that's interested in scripting or extensibility in general, and those sessions are on Thursday and Friday, I guess tomorrow and Friday, and they're all-day sessions. And we do have some people from the Photoshop team talking about extensibility there. It's very exciting what you can do. To me, that's that's the great power of these tools. What Adobe creates is a foundation, and then it's all the stuff that people build on top of it, which gets really exciting. So that's awesome that you're doing that. Meredith, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Meredith Stotzner. I've been on the Photoshop team for 18 years. I spent a good part of that as a tester, like 15 years testing, and now I'm a product manager. I work for Steven, he's my manager, but actually I work for you guys. My job specifically is to help solve those vexingly menial tasks, and I do that as part of the ART team, the Applied Research and Technology, and these are the developers. This section of the Photoshop team brings the Sensei technologies for like select subject, content-aware fill, the new object selection tool. So yeah, we want to hear what's bugging you, what is so boring. So bring it on, people.
That's awesome. That's great. And Matthew, I'm going to end with Russell at the end because he's right in the middle, bouncing back and forth on my screen. Matthew, tell us about yourself.
It's a smart move. Hi, my name is Matthew Richmond. I'm the design director, the experience design director for Photoshop and a handful of other tools in Creative Suite. So I represent the design contingency. What's it like being a designer at Adobe? So my teams work directly with everybody that's on this panel. And I've spent a lot of time with them trying to figure out where we should make things better, where we should make things faster, where we want to go as we move forward. I've been at Adobe for 5 years. I'm based in New York. I'm proud to say that I'm based in New York, and in New York we now have a design team and a small engineering team actually working on Photoshop. I've been on the team for 5 years, but before that, dating back to the mid-90s, I was a contractor. I had a design studio, and we did contract work for Adobe. So we started working on InDesign. I actually made myself the original web photo galleries inside of Photoshop. My first version of Photoshop was Photoshop 2.5. So I had it before layers when I was in college. And I started teaching it right after learning it. So I met David a long time ago as an educator, and I used to present at some of the conferences, and here we are again.
Yeah, here we are again. Here we are again. That was you've always done such amazing design work, and I've always been impressed by the work you do and the humor that you bring to it, which has been this great thing. A lot of people don't realize about Matthew actually that he is actually grayscale in real life. It's a genetic thing. Most people don't, most people are in full color, but Matthew, he's a designer all the way.
I had as soon as we all became trapped behind cameras, it was kind of a little race about what we could all do, and just lowering the saturation, it makes people happy. I feel a little more comfortable in black and white.
Isn't that funny? It actually does make people happy. It makes me happy seeing it.
Yeah,
I love it. So
comes up all the time. Everybody should do it.
Well, not everybody. If everyone did it, then you'd be the one person on color. So, you'd have to go sepia tone or something. That would be. All right, Russell Williams, you have been. We were talking before, and you've also been on the team a long time. I see your virtual background there with Photoshop 5. Tell us about your experience with Photoshop.
Well, actually, the first version I used was 3 back when I was working at Apple on building macOS 10. Version 5 is the first version that I actually contributed code to after I came to Adobe, and I've been working on the Photoshop team for 23 years now, and with various titles, chief architect, engineering manager, tech lead. Basically, though, I've been a code monkey for 23 years, and it's been great. That's great. You've been in the guts of this program and seen it change over a lot of time. I love that. We'll get back to that too. That's an important point, because it has changed a lot. Not just the features that most of us see. It's changed a lot under the hood in all kinds of ways. I'm check to see if there's actually questions popping up here before we jump in. Okay, I'll get back to that. The thing about Photoshop is not just that it's been around
for 30 years. This is the 30th anniversary of Photoshop. There are people on this call right now, people at Creative Pro Week, who literally were not born when Photoshop came out, which is, so it's part of the fabric of our culture, our lives, our culture, our work. And I find that fascinating that this piece of software that has just permeated everything. It's truly ubiquitous. And I think that to the point that it's, of course, even become a verb, right? We talk about photoshopping things. There's very little else out there that has become so ubiquitous that it's become verbed, as they say. So I'm curious what you on the panel think about that. How is it working inside of something which everybody knows? It shows up in cartoons and movies everywhere. Does anybody want to jump in on that, Stephen?
Sure. I mean, I'll say it was a little bit intimidating joining the team. At first, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Photoshop. And I was frankly kind of amazed at how much responsibility I was immediately given when I joined the team. We're a relatively small team of people who are stewards over this amazing product, and it's a lot of responsibility. It is daunting, but we're also really proud to continue to move it forward. And everybody on the team really cares deeply about our customers and is always trying to do the right thing for our customers.
I thought it was really interesting to see how the advent of layers in Photoshop in the 1990s sort of seemed to shift the way that advertising art looked. And photo collage as the form that a lot of commercial art took in the 90s after Photoshop added layers was pretty amazing. And I knew we'd really arrived when we showed up in a James Bond movie. So.
Wow. I can't remember that. Do you remember which one?
Casino Royale. The local agent tells Bond has counterfeited a picture of the opponent and says it's amazing what they can do with Photoshop these days.
Wow.
It looks like David froze.
These days, but it is everywhere, and the image that you have behind you as well, because that moment, what was that, 94 or something, when all of a sudden we went from, maybe 93, when we went from having to do channel operations, chops, Bertman Roy's favorite thing, when we went from chops to layers, it was life-changing, completely life-changing. That was amazing. And of course, that image behind you from Photoshop 5 sort of gives a sense of artwork that was coming out at that time. Love that. Meredith, you were going to?
Oh, I just, when I first came to Adobe, I was actually visiting a friend when I got scooped up and joined the overall company. But yeah, when I first if you've ever been to San Jose and if you've ever seen the Adobe buildings, they're tall, they've got a big silver A on it. And as we turned that corner, I just wanted to jump out and go, we're not worthy. Because Photoshop and Acrobat changed my life, the way I worked. It was, and like Stephen said, it's such an honor to work on the team, and it's a huge responsibility and an honor to represent the customers, because there's so many people who really count on it to do their daily work and make amazing art. Stewards, it's definitely a big responsibility.
One of the things that's interesting, you talk about creating art, and it just sparked this thing that I've been thinking about for 30 years, that people use Photoshop for all sorts of things. There are people who use it for fine art, right? Bertman Roy and many other people are doing beautiful, beautiful work at fine art work in Photoshop. And then on the other side of the spectrum, or a different side of the something, you've got people who are doing scientific and medical imaging. You've got people who are doing architectural work. You've got the business graphics. You have so many different types of customers, many of whom are represented here at Creative Pro Week. How do you manage all of those? How can you become such a generalist?
Well, I think, you know,
You forgot memes, David. You know,
Sorry.
people creating meme creators. It's
the most important.
It's actually one of the most entertaining things to go look through the Reddit Photoshop battles, and I enjoy
Fails.
that a lot. Yeah, I'll say, you know, one of the things that we often talk about, and I think has been a core principle, is that, you know, with Photoshop, we've focused on building a set of tools, a toolkit of things that really together provide unlimited opportunity, unlimited capability to create whatever you imagine. And I think that we've been able to first build that tool set, add to it, and not detract from it either, so that it can be used in many, many different ways.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it has just built, and in some ways it becomes cumbersome in that way, right? I mean, it's hard to take stuff out because there are people who rely on it, and so that probably is a challenge, right? You can't say, well, there's only 12 people who use this, but so we'll jettison it for something cooler. I mean, we've seen that a number of times, right?
We do. Yeah, go ahead, Russell.
I was just going to say that's been a challenge ever since the whole 23 years I've been working on it, is how do you move forward and add to the capabilities. You have two sets of customers, right? New customers and people who already know the keyboard shortcuts, and anything you change is like putting roadblocks in their way.
Yeah.
And conversely, we can't be selling a 1992 program today. It has to move forward. And so that balance between satisfying, making things better for existing users without screwing up their workflows, and making things simpler for new users to begin using this very complicated thing, that balance has always been a challenge.
Yeah, the struggle's real. I mean, I remember just when I first started talking to Adobe about this responsibility, and I did a double take, I was like, so there's a lot of people that make decisions about Photoshop, right? It's not just going to be one person. And they laughed. They were like, oh yeah, it's a big ship. It takes a lot of us to steer it. And one of the things that I'd done as a contractor with Adobe is the original Photoshop.com. And I remember vividly the page that was there where we did identify all the industries that used Photoshop. And there was like 20, might have even been 25 different industries that had Photoshop at that point at the core of their business. And there's a lot of responsibility, and, you know, change, we say this a lot, like new and better is still change, and change is still really hard.
Change is definitely hard. And you're absolutely right. You have to have change in order to improve. That's the definition, right? It must change, and yet that is, I like the way you put that. It is really hard for people.
Yeah.
The keyboard shortcuts is like the simplest example that Russell was pointing out. So many people for so many years have said, look, just make all the keyboard shortcuts the same in all the apps. And the question, the answer to that is, of course, well, who do you want to make unhappy? Someone's going to be unhappy. And is it going to be the InDesign users? No. It's, you know, who's going to suffer? So yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I was just going to give a recent example from maybe a year and a half ago or so. Undo, such a fundamental command. And so we were worried about what would happen when we changed the functionality of it, because the previous functionality where it would toggle before and after is very powerful, because you quickly see what your change did.
Yes.
And then at the same time, we had educators come and tell us, we have kids that don't dare to do anything because they get into a state and then they can't get back because they didn't understand the legacy command toggle mode in undo. And so that's an example of, you have to do something, but you have to do something in a way that doesn't break 24 years of muscle memory for a lot of creatives.
The
And
other
then,
thing about that example is that we didn't change the features, the actual features in the product hardly at all. We always had multiple undos back since Photoshop 5. You could step backward in history, but people, because it wasn't the same as the undo command, it confused people who use other programs that in the intervening years have implemented multiple undo. And we have this joke that I don't know what the percentage is of feature requests that we get are already in the product.
yeah, I've definitely seen that. People saying, how do I do that? It's like, well, did you look here? And it's like, well, that must have just been in the newest version, right? It's like, no, that's been there for 20 years. That's a huge challenge indeed for Adobe to make things discoverable, and for we educators as well. That's always a trick. Meredith, were you?
Yeah,
I think you were going to jump in.
I was going to jump in and say our goal is to make, for going forward, make you want to abandon those old tools and make the new tools so awesome and compelling that you never want to see the magic wand tool ever again.
Well, we've just been hearing about how the magic wand tool is much better than it used to be, but I get your point. That's great. Of course, the other big change that's happened that there was such hoopla about was the scaling issue, where do you just drag to scale or do you shift drag, and it's amazing. I really think that the point about muscle memory is key. It's in our hands. So much of what we do is in our hands already, especially those of us who've been doing it a long time. It's shift that. It's like playing the piano and you move a key and you say, well, is it that big of a deal to move a key? It's like, well, yeah, because it's already in my fingers. I know where my fingers are supposed to go.
Yeah, and that particular example, we made the change to undo and proportional transform at the same time. And the two were both pretty significant changes, but received very differently. Overall, we felt like the reaction to undo was one of kind of relief, like, oh, great, Photoshop just behaves like most applications. Command or Control Z multiple times does undo like it does in other applications. Proportional transform was interesting because we made that change to be more consistent with, again, other applications, including XD and non-Adobe applications. But that change was much, much more difficult for people to understand and accept. And we actually ended up changing it, and I'll just, a public service announcement, all you have to do is in the top tool options bar, there's a link icon. If you press it, it will remember whether or not everything is proportional or non-proportional, and then Shift just toggles that. So that was a great example of where we made a change that we thought was going to be, we knew it was going to be difficult for people to adapt to, but we thought it would be good in the long run. And I think it was harder than any of us expected, or that I expected at least, for people to adapt to that. Whereas Command Z or Control Z was pretty quick. People adopted that pretty quickly.
Even for us who sat there and watched users use it and were fine with it, I mean, we still do it backwards. And you talk, David, about like Photoshop being a part of history and just cemented into culture. That hand position, like it's almost like it's a greeting for people that use Photoshop. Like I don't think any of us really realize how baked in that finger positioning was, because I remind myself all the time.
That's great. I completely agree with you. The muscle memory is a huge thing. Stephen was talking about that idea of the options bar across the top and the checkbox and where to look. And it reminded me that one of the challenges is with Photoshop and all of these, it's not just the changes, but it's that each app that we use, most people here are using Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign in one order or the other there. And as we move back and forth from one app to the next, they look different, they feel different. And there are those who say, just mush them all together, make them all exactly the same, which, as we've just been talking about, would be extremely difficult, and probably cause more problems. But there is that movement still to try and make an experience, a user experience, be more even. How can we do that without making people crazy? And what have you been doing to improve that? Because we have seen, for example, the properties panel appear in more and more apps, and et cetera. Is that a Matthew question?
I mean, you said user experience, so I think that I got to go first here. Little known fact about the design team at Adobe. The design team is centralized, which is actually one of my favorite parts about working at Adobe and working on the design team. So for many years now, the designers are actually all on the same team. And we, on a certain level, it's my responsibility to staff Photoshop and Lightroom and things like that, and make sure that they have the right designers with the right skill sets for their needs. But at the same time, we have a lot of visibility into all of these things. So when it comes to interop, we know. We got lists out the wazoo. The question is how and what's the right way to approach these things. And Stephen kind of hinted at this a little earlier. It's, if you've been using Illustrator for 20 something years and you do a fresh install today and you open it up, like, it looks different. Like, the properties panel is in a different position. The panels that we've gotten so accustomed to, they're actually behind another workspace, and we have to go and we have to look for them and kind of reload that back up. But to a new user opening up some of our tools, their experience is slightly different. So that's kind of one way that we're going about doing this. And what new and younger users have as they open up our tools for the first time is they actually have experience with other tools, lighter weight tools, little things that they've learned over the years. Digital imaging and design tools are everywhere. They're on phones, they're on the web. And a lot of that is done to accommodate their expectations and kind of their needs. My team has spent a lot of time thinking about interoperability and continuity. And I think one of the things that I'm most excited about in working with Photoshop and thinking about Photoshop is just the shift that this team has made in the last couple of years to spinning Photoshop up on a different surface. And for a lot of us that know Photoshop inside and out, while it's not all there yet, the amount of growth that we've gone through and what the team's gone through and the flexibility and some of the modernization efforts that are happening are really, in my opinion, I think going to be really great, amazing catalysts to more interoperability and continuity, not just in between the tools, but just the evolution of Photoshop. And like Meredith was saying, these new tools and faster tools and things that you didn't even realize you've been waiting for years to happen slowly in front of you are going to be able to happen a lot faster. So I'm excited about kind of where we're going and what the potential is now.
And I think that one of the things that Matthew's talking about in terms of the new platforms are things like Photoshop for the iPad.
Absolutely.
Right? So where you've got a tablet experience, very different user experience than working on a desktop or a laptop. And I'm curious, how is that? That's a huge change for Photoshop. And honestly, it's incredible that it works as well as it does. Can any of you talk a little bit about the technical challenges there, or the experience of working?
Well, the big challenge with that is that Photoshop was not created with the user interface neatly separated from the guts. And so the big challenge was how to put a different user interface on something that was never meant to have its user interface separated from the guts. What runs on the iPad is the real Photoshop guts, but of course none of the user interface can be used. So there's another new UI built on top of it. And the way you can tell that the full Photoshop guts are in there is that you can open a PSD. No matter how complicated the effects, layers, etc., it will open on the iPad. No matter how big it is, it will open on the iPad. But it's going to take some time to build up written from scratch iPad user interface to put on top of the existing Photoshop guts.
Just a quick aside to add to what Russell said. One of the most fun things about the architecture of iPad is when we started building it is that, obviously iPad is a constrained device compared to desktop, and the history of Photoshop actually became a huge benefit to moving to the iPad, because Photoshop 1.0 was developed in a time where there was very limited memory. And so the architecture of Photoshop is such that it actually it is capable of running on low power devices. And that became a huge benefit as we moved to iPad, to inherit all of that structure to it. There's other disadvantages, like Russell shared, that are more challenging to build a new UI on top of this thing, but there's so much goodness that we inherited because of the frankly amazing architecture of Photoshop that allows it to run really well on iPad.
Yeah, specifically the fitting into a small memory space with no virtual memory, no swapping. The original Macintosh was that way, and now the iPad is that way. And it apparently blew some people's minds who had worked on other imaging programs for the iPad, when they just thought the demo had been faked. When they saw the demo where we opened a multi-gigabyte image on the iPad and just zoomed and panned around on it. And that's entirely possible because of that history of Photoshop, where Photoshop implements its own virtual memory system for gigantic images to fit in a very constrained environment like that.
One of the specific challenges from the Adobe Sensei side is these machine learning models. When you put them on the desktop, you can have a 40 megabyte model. You can't have a 40 megabyte machine learning model on the iPad. So our section of the team had to shrink these models down to be able to fit them on the iPad.
Interesting. So that's fascinating that it is based on this really old technology, which normally would be a hindrance, but now suddenly magically becomes an unexpected benefit. And so this is stuff that was created by Tom Knoll 30 years ago. Is that right?
Yes, Tom and his brother, and the first engineer hired to work on Photoshop, Mark Hamburg. And the three of them, Tom and John and Mark, just won an Oscar this last year for creating Photoshop.
I will. I'm going to throw in a personal aside there that I was actually at a grocery store. I live outside of Seattle. I was at a grocery store last year with my son, and we were shopping and turned the corner, and there was Mark Hamburg coming up the aisle, and it was this very surreal moment. It was like, didn't I just see you on the Oscars? It was great. So you never know. And that's actually an important point to all of this. And one of the reasons we're doing this kind of panel is that everyone who's been involved with Photoshop for all these years, they're people. These are people. There's people who are creating this tool, crafting this tool over the years to it's not just like some widget that gets stamped out. This is a really, truly crafted piece of software for decades now. So it's so fun to see your faces and see other people from the Photoshop community out there. I love that. We had a question. I just have to ask this question. I think Mo Jogi asked this. Mo's in South Africa. He called in and he wrote in and he said he wanted to know your favorite Easter egg in Photoshop. And I know it's a little frivolous, but some of us, especially people who are in the software all the time, the Easter eggs are a bit of humor and fun that actually bring some joy. Do you have any favorite Easter eggs you want to share? Either current or past, I should say.
My favorite is the toast and coffee for the. I don't know if you can show it to people, but
I can't. Can you easily tell us how to find it?
I'm not sure which keys I have to press to make it happen.
We'll put it in the chat. We'll get that in the chat later.
When we were doing the new UI interface where you could choose if you wanted light or dark, we were referring to them as rye I forget the bread ones. And then our Japanese pre-release team came back and said, bread is not very international. So we tried to think of some other things that were international. And my idea had been coffee. I'm like, everybody in the world drinks coffee now, right? So there is a keyboard shortcut that if you click on in the preferences for which interface you want, you can have toast. It shows up as toast, or it shows up as coffee. I'll have to research that. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But
if anyone knows what that is, throw that in the chat, and we'll share that. I'd forgotten that one.
Yeah, if you just bang around on the Shift, Control, Option, Alt, Command, whatever, you'll find it. You click on those squares.
That's great. Anything else sneaky in there, maybe deep in the code that Jesper or Russell you can share with us? Things we should go look for? Not really.
I haven't found a new. We sort of haven't put any new ones in a while. I think we're falling down on the job here. Maybe we should put Merlin back in.
I was just going to say my favorite is one that we haven't put in yet, and I keep forgetting, Russell, to follow up with you to put this in. But Russell came up with a fantastic idea when we were working on the color picker improvement, the color wheel, and he drew up a design for a color pickle because we kept mispronouncing color picker. And then he also came up with a cucumber, which I thought was a fantastic also. And so I have not forgotten that, Russell, and I really want you to put that in as an Easter egg.
This is Russell Brown?
No, this is Russell Williams.
Oh, Russell Williams. I'm sorry, Russell Williams. Sorry. I was thinking about Russell Brown recently as well because of the, again, looking at the history of Photoshop and how he was just, to me, that the history we can't talk about that without talking about the Knoll brothers and Mark and Russell Brown, Bertman Roy, David Biedny, some of those people who were there. Again, this is over the decades have been important. I thought Russell was going to be joining us as well. Russell Brown was going to be joining us, but I love the idea of a cucumber. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the extensibility. I just really want to go back to that because it is like I've got the Creative Developer Summit on my mind, and you've built this form, this foundation on which to build, and some people are simply living on that foundation and they're doing their design work on that within Photoshop. But a lot of people are extending it far beyond. And some of that is through scripting, through the plugins over the years and so on. And some of that is through the cloud. And it seems like there's two technologies there that need to be talked about. And the cloud technology especially is fascinating to me. Like, how could that possibly work through saving stuff to the cloud? Can you talk about that? No, not.
That was a lot of question.
Sorry, that was.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you extend it, and what's cool about the cloud?
Yeah.
What's cool about the cloud is that the idea is that you can have immediate access to your stuff wherever you are, and that you can share stuff very immediately through the cloud, like a library, or I save a document and it's instantly available for you to open it. You don't have to run down the hall with a floppy disk anymore.
Are you actually breaking the laws of physics to take a gigabyte document and suddenly have it on a tablet and then have it on your phone? And is that just magic, or?
Well, we always break the laws of physics in Photoshop. I mean, it's like that cartoon with the doctor showing the patient an X-ray and said, "Well, you had cancer, but we fixed it in Photoshop."
Ouch. Yes.
The trick with the cloud, the tricky thing we do with the cloud is that when you're editing a really big document, we only save the changes to the cloud. We only save the change layers. When you save, you're working along, we auto-save every couple of minutes and only push the layers that you've actually changed to the cloud. And so we can keep a multi-gigabyte document up to date with a lot less talking to the cloud than it might seem. Then, for instance, if you were saving it to Dropbox and had to wait for the whole document to sync up to the cloud and sync down to the other side.
You know, it feels like in many ways, most of us who are using Photoshop are just thinking about those pixels. There's lots and lots of pixels, and you have to push those pixels up and down and move them around. And yet, it seems like under the surface, there's a lot more going on. You're not just pushing pixels.
Yeah, I actually wanted to say something about that. Photoshop started out being mostly about pushing pixels. Photoshop up through about Photoshop 7 was about blending and scaling and a few, sharpen and blur. They're all simple math of take this pixel and add that pixel to it and change the color of this other pixel and copy it over here. Very basic stuff, and you could do an incredible amount with just that level of math on pixels. And then in Photoshop 7, we added the healing brush, and that really was the start of this revolution of things that used higher level math. The healing brush does something called gradient domain image editing. It uses partial differential equations and so on to do the kind of blending that it does that's something much, much different. You can't simply describe it in terms of copying pixels from here to there. And the content-aware fill and some of the smarter edge finding things, they're all built on those kind of higher level, somebody with an advanced math degree figured out how to do something that you couldn't do just by thinking of it in terms of pixels. And then the latest revolution has been the machine learning features, where once again, the select subject stuff, you can't describe that in terms of pixels. You can't even describe it in terms of equations. It's a machine learning model, and only the people who train the model have any idea how it actually works.
And yet, I think even then, from my very limited understanding of machine learning, even then, we may actually not know. We know how we trained it. We don't necessarily know what's going on under the hood.
Yeah.
That's true. There's much less transparency to the people who build it for how a machine learning model is doing what it's doing than there was for the previous kinds of features where we understood the math.
I, for one, welcome our machine learning overlords as they take over the world.
It's a little Isaac Asimov, yeah. Sounds like that.
Yeah,
I love that. And yet there's more and more features that are coming out. Meredith, you were talking about Sensei. I always feel like whenever I say something, I'm like, Sensei, that's the magic. But it does feel like a lot of what we're experiencing now and future must be based on this idea of machine learning or of the Sensei magic, of we're training Photoshop to be able to do things that we as humans expect.
Yeah. We're training it to do things that we as humans don't want to do, giving it the really boring, repetitive tasks. And it's really doing a great job. Sometimes there's things, I can't talk about now, but I look at some things that will be coming out soon. It just blows me away. Just totally mind-blowing.
So that is one of the main things I assume the team has been working on is what can we do to take away the mundane, the boring stuff from users and empower them through Sensei?
Yep, that is one of the key goals of the machine learning and Sensei in general, is just to, we want to enable people to have more time to do the creative fun work, not sit there, spending 2 hours making a selection. Making selections, it's not fun. Being creative and having these ideas and getting the ideas from your head onto your pixels, that's the fun part.
And it's not just that it's not fun. I mean, there's, as much as it is a machine overlord kind of factor, you know, if you want to cut out a penguin, how many penguins have we cut out? 5, 6? Like, we could deal with a routine that's seen thousands, if not millions, and it's just going to be much more accurate, right? You know, just chasing, you know, with these weird zoom backgrounds, like my hair is like this is a bad Photoshop example. Like, you know, machine learning can do this much faster than the channel play that we've been doing for years. It's just a matter of getting it good enough.
That's great. A question that came up in here, takes us a little bit off, but it's still based on the technology and how do we deal with the technology that's changing over time. Somebody wrote in, I'm sorry, I don't have the names in here, that they work for a scientific publisher, but they're using newer versions of, they're using older versions than the files that are created. So oftentimes people send CC 2020 files to them, but they may be using an earlier version. Is there anything you can do, newer files in older versions of the software without text being broken up or without things being messed up? I think Photoshop has actually done a better job than most apps at that. I think they were talking about InDesign and Illustrator as well, but is that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the different versions. Is that something you need to look at or think about?
There's your Photoshop files are like you said, we've done I think a pretty good job of retaining backwards compatibility. And even when you have something that is unrecognizable, it usually opens in Photoshop, but might not be editable or may change slightly in its representation. But as long as you're working with some of the objects, for lack of a better word, that are representable in an older version of Photoshop, you'll have essentially 100% compatibility. If you start, creating artboards, for example, in a new file and try to open that up in an older version of Photoshop that doesn't support artboards, then, it's going to look different. My understanding is that it will open, but it will just look a little bit, the layers structure will look a little bit different than it will in the new versions.
Let's go. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you just imagine something like a new kind of adjustment layer, right? If there's a new kind of adjustment layer that's doing something to the layers below that doesn't exist in the old version, there's only so much you can do. And the fallback we have, the ultimate fallback for all of this stuff is you can always open, when in an old version, you can always open the composited image if you want pixel accuracy of what the new version created, the composite image. But if you want to keep the layers, if there's a new kind of layer in there, there's only so much we can do. We do, in fact, pay a lot of attention to that.
And actually, Russell kind of touched on something that I wanted to bring up, which is, speaking to the future of Photoshop a bit. Obviously, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary this year of Photoshop, but we are very focused on the next 30 years. And there is some just really exciting work happening on the team right now. We recently completed a complete rewrite of the compositing engine of Photoshop. Really kind of the core piece of Photoshop has now completely been rewritten. And that is going to enable some really significant performance improvements, better utilization of the GPU, and new creative effects that were not possible in the old version or with the old compositing model of Photoshop. So, even though Photoshop is 30 years old, the code itself is not 30 years old. We have rewritten many, many parts of Photoshop, including now the core compositing engine that is really exciting to see what that's going to enable us to do in the future.
Can you say anything more about the themes? We talked a little bit about machine learning and what you're saying about the underlying core technology. Are there other themes or directions that you're focusing on as we look forward toward, I don't know about the next 30 years. Let's think about the next 5 years.
Yeah, we do have a couple of themes for the next 3 years, we'll say.
Okay.
One is around performance and modernization of the engine. Another is around creating a synced experience wherever you go. So Cloud Documents is a good example of that. But basically, wherever you go, whether you're on 2 desktop machines, a laptop, an iPad, or whatever it might be, you're still going to have access to the same content, the same preferences and presets, et cetera, wherever you go. So that's another theme that we're working on. Obviously, we have a lot that we're investing in to bring more and more capabilities to the iPad and to grow out the capabilities of the iPad as a platform. We talked about machine learning and kind of how that can, in many ways, replace or augment existing workflows. Extensibility is another one where we're making a huge investment this year in enabling much better access and management of the experience of finding and installing a plugin, keeping it up to date, but also on the developer side, how do we make it way easier to develop new plugins? Another theme is around simplifying the product. So we're always looking for ways that we can do better things by default, or change the experience in positive ways that will simplify Photoshop.
That's great.
Yeah, and in there is, you know, continuing to focus on inputs, the amount of inputs that we have now at our in front of us, from touch to mouse, all at the same time. You know, as we think about different surfaces, it's about making sure that we maintain the speed that desktop users are used to, right? Like there's this moment when you really start to kind of gel with Photoshop that it kind of disappears and your hands are moving and stuff's happening really fast. And a lot of the work that we've been doing as we've been trying to modernize the UI is still chasing that speed of input.
Wow, that's great.
People worry a little bit when they hear simplify Photoshop. They think that we're going to make it less powerful or, you know, dumb it down, but it's really just removing the complexity that's not necessary.
Yeah.
It'll help professionals as well.
That's great. That's really helpful. Any other, we're going to have to wrap this up. Anything else that you want to make sure that the Creative Pro community hears about from the Photoshop team? I mean, we've covered so much. It's incredible, and I really appreciate getting these insights into what's going on, what the history and the present day workings of Photoshop and the future of Photoshop, and you know, definitely here's to the next 30 years. I do like that.
Yeah,
that idea.
I'll just maybe leave a parting comment that having observed the history of Photoshop and then been on the team for 9 years, I can honestly say I've never been more excited about the future of Photoshop. I think our best days are ahead of us. Awesome. There are just some really amazing things that are in the works that I think people will be, in some cases, blown away that it is possible. In other cases, just impressed by the what we're able to do. I think there's really great things coming.
One of the things I think is really cool is that we are working on the visual things are really, really hard problems. And we've been trying to do better selections with less work the entire time I've been here. And you can think of, how many different new tools and commands and stuff. We're always trying to push this forward. There's so much you can do with images that A, we can't do yet, or B, we can't do easily. It's not like spreadsheets or word processing. There's no like huge advances in, that, I could format my my Word document better. You know, that there isn't a lot more that needs to be done in the formatting of Word documents. But the vistas are unlimited in visual things like Photoshop and Premiere. So I'm really excited about it for the reasons Stephen mentioned.
And I want to jump in and say that we're always listening. One of the places you can go for help and that the team reads is feedback.photoshop.com. It's our feedback forum for the public, and I always encourage people to go to feedback.photoshop.com because our eyeballs are on that.
That's great to know. That's actually really, really helpful to know. Excuse me, if other people want to get involved with pre-release, are you trying to get more people from the CreativePro community, designers involved with pre-release or other, is there some way they can do that? Or is feedback really the best way at this point?
Feedback is definitely the place to start for sure. We have a pretty active pre-release program today, but we are actually looking for, we're planning to expand it a bit. So we are taking applications to join the pre-release program. Maybe David, I could send you some of the information about that, and you could pass it along to the attendees.
Great, I'd be happy to do that. Let's do that. Listen, I just want to say again, thank you so much, all 5 of you, for being here. Stephen, Meredith, Matthew, Russell, Jesper. Incredibly helpful, and I so appreciate you taking the time. I know that it's an incredibly busy time right now in the Photoshop cycle, so thank you for taking the time to be here and sharing this information with the CreativePro community and being here at CreativePro Week. I love it. I'm sure there'll be more questions. We'll answer as many as we can. I know there are some more things that we didn't get to in the polls in the chat, and we'll try and fill those in and get you answers as soon as we can, everybody. Thank you all very much for being here, and we are looking forward to seeing you perhaps next year in Washington, D.C. at CreativePro Week 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, David.
Bye.
Thanks.